The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched before Catherine Wells like a cathedral made of living crystal. Light from 3 distant suns filtered through the transparent walls and cast rainbow patterns across the floor where she stood alone. Around her, seated on platforms that rose like steps toward the domed ceiling, the representatives of 12 alien civilizations watched her with eyes that held nothing but contempt. Catherine was 53 years old. She had served as Earth's ambassador to the galactic community for 11 years. She had faced hostile negotiations before. She had endured insults and threats from species who saw humanity as nothing more than newcomers to the stars. But she had never felt the weight of hatred quite like this. Admiral Marcus Cole stood 3 steps behind her, his hands clasped at the small of his back. His uniform was crisp and dark blue, decorated with the silver eagles of Earth Command. His face showed no emotion, but Catherine had known him long enough to recognize the tension in his jaw. He was angry. He was holding it back with everything he had. High Chancellor Zyroth of the Verathari Dominion rose from his obsidian throne at the center of the highest platform. He was tall and thin, with gray skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his elongated face focused on Catherine with cold precision. When he spoke, his voice echoed through the chamber, like stones dropping into a deep well. He declared that humanity had been summoned to answer for crimes against the galactic order. He said that the primitive species from the small blue world called Earth had expanded too far and too fast. He accused them of claiming territories in the outer rim that belonged to older and wiser civilizations. He demanded to know what right humanity had to reach for stars that were never meant for them. Catherine opened her mouth to respond, but the laughter came first. It rolled through the chamber from every platform, from every species. The Kralith delegates, massive creatures with armored hides and tusks like curved blades, pounded their fists against their seats. The Sindari, elegant beings with silver skin and 3-jointed limbs, made high whistling sounds that their translators converted into mocking giggles. Even the usually silent Omarathi, whose bodies were made of living shadow, seemed to pulse with amusement. The Kralith military commander, Admiral Vexnar, rose from his seat and pointed one thick finger at Catherine. His translator rendered his growling words into flat English. He called humanity a species of frightened mammals who built their ships from recycled garbage. He said Earth's military was a joke that even the youngest Kralith warrior could crush with one hand. He suggested that humans should crawl back into the mud they came from before someone taught them the true meaning of power. More laughter, more contempt. Catherine felt Admiral Cole shift his weight behind her. She knew what he wanted to do. She wanted to do it too. But she had learned long ago that anger was a luxury ambassadors could not afford. The Sindari delegate, a female named Sarath, spoke next. Her voice was soft and musical, which made her words even more cutting. She proposed that humanity should surrender their colonies immediately. She suggested that the council races could divide human territories among themselves fairly. She said it would be a mercy, really. Humans were clearly not capable of managing their own affairs among the stars. Chancellor Zyroth raised one long hand for silence. The chamber fell quiet. He looked down at Catherine, with something that might have been pity if it had not been so poisoned with arrogance. He gave humanity a choice. Surrender everything they had built beyond their own solar system. Pull back their ships and their people to Earth and the handful of rocks orbiting their little yellow sun. Accept their place as a minor species under council supervision, or face the consequences. Catherine asked what those consequences would be. Zyroth smiled. At least, his face moved in a way that humans had learned to interpret as a smile. He said the combined fleets of the council races numbered over 20,000 warships. He said those fleets would reduce Earth to ash and glass within a single rotation of their pathetic moon. He said humanity's 500 military vessels would provide amusement for perhaps an hour before they were swept away like dust. The chamber waited. Every eye in the room was fixed on Catherine Wells. She requested time to consult with her government. She kept her voice calm and steady. She did not beg. She did not show fear. She simply asked for what any diplomat would ask for in such a situation. Xyroth conferred briefly with the other senior delegates. Then he granted her request. Humanity would have until dawn of the next Varoth cycle to deliver their answer. That was approximately 18 standard hours. After that, the fleets would launch. As Catherine turned to leave, Xyroth called out one final statement. He said that by this time tomorrow, Earth would kneel before the Council, or Earth would burn. There was no third option. Catherine walked out of the chamber with Admiral Cole at her side. Neither of them spoke until they reached the secure room where the rest of their small delegation waited. Then Cole closed the door and activated the privacy screens. He asked her what she wanted to do. Catherine sat down heavily in a chair. She was tired. She was angry. But beneath both of those emotions, there was something else. Something that had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. She told Cole to contact General Andrew Stone at Sol Command. She told him to use the quantum link, the one that could not be intercepted or traced. She told him to send just one word. Cole nodded. He understood. He had been waiting too. The word was Ghostfall. 6 hours later, across 17 different star systems, humanity's visible war fleet began to power down. Ships that had been patrolling borders went dark. Communication arrays fell silent. Crews abandoned their stations according to protocols they had memorized years ago but never expected to use. By the time the first light of dawn touched the crystal spires of Varoth Prime, every human warship had vanished from sensor range. The aliens who had mocked Earth at the Council detected nothing but empty space where human vessels had once been. It was as if the entire fleet had never existed at all. Catherine Wells slept peacefully that night. She dreamed of ghosts rising from the darkness between stars, and in her dream, the ghosts were smiling. Morning came to Varoth Prime with the slow rise of 3 suns over the crystal horizon. The council chamber filled once again with the representatives of 12 civilizations, and they came with triumphant smiles on their alien faces. They came expecting to witness the surrender of humanity. Catherine Wells stood alone in the center of the Great Hall. Admiral Cole and the military attaches had departed during the night without explanation. She had not asked where they were going. She already knew. Now she faced the jeering council by herself, her hands folded calmly before her, her expression revealing nothing. Chancellor Xyroth entered the chamber last. He walked slowly to his obsidian throne and settled into it like a king preparing to receive tribute from a conquered nation. His 4 eyes swept across the room until they found Catherine standing small and solitary on the floor below. He asked if humanity was ready to deliver their answer. Before Catherine could speak, Admiral Vexnar of the Kralith rose from his seat with excitement he could barely contain. He reported that all human military vessels had disappeared from their positions across every monitored sector. He said that sensor stations throughout the galaxy had confirmed it. Every human warship was gone. Not destroyed, not retreating in formation. Simply gone, as if they had been erased from existence. Laughter erupted through the chamber once again. The Sindari delegate Sereth covered her mouth with 3 delicate fingers as she giggled. The Omorathi shadows pulsed with dark amusement. Even the normally stern Varathari officers allowed themselves thin smiles. Vexnar declared that humanity had fled in terror. He said their primitive ships had probably scattered into the deep void where they would drift until their power failed and their crews starved. He called humans cowards of the lowest kind. He said it was almost disappointing that there would be no battle at all. Xyroth raised his hand for silence. He looked down at Catherine with mock sympathy. He said that perhaps surrender was no longer necessary. Perhaps humanity had already accepted their defeat. Perhaps their ambassador would like to request mercy on behalf of her cowering species. Catherine said nothing. She simply stood there, with her hands folded and her eyes steady. The smallest hint of a smile touched the corner of her lips. On Earth, 12,000 light-years away, Dr. Helen Carter monitored the situation from the Global Defense Nexus. The facility was buried deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, protected by 3 miles of solid granite and shielded by technology that even the council races did not know existed. Banks of screens surrounded her, displaying data from hidden sensor networks scattered across the galaxy. Commander Nathan Price stood beside her, coordinating the final phase of Ghostfall through a holographic interface. He was young for his position, only 34. But he had been chosen for this role because he could think faster than anyone else in Earth Command. His fingers moved across the controls with practiced precision as he tracked the movements of ships that officially did not exist. The Council races were mobilizing their combined fleet. 17,000 warships from 12 civilizations were gathering at the staging point near the Verath system. They would begin their journey to Earth within hours, confident in their overwhelming numbers. They believed they were going to conquer a defenseless world. Price checked the status of every hidden asset one more time. Everything was in position. Everything was ready. 200 years of preparation had led to this moment. He allowed himself a small nod of satisfaction. Dr. Carter pulled up the visual feed from the council chamber on Verath Prime. She watched Catherine Wells standing alone before the mocking aliens. She admired the ambassador's composure. It took a special kind of courage to stand in the mouth of the lion and smile. Back in the Crystal Hall, Chancellor Zyroth was delivering his final pronouncement. He declared that the combined fleet of the Council races would depart for Earth immediately. He said 17,000 warships would make the 3-day journey to the Sol system. He promised that humanity's homeworld would be reduced to rubble within hours of their arrival. He announced that any human who wished to survive should begin praying to whatever primitive gods their species believed in. The fleet commanders received their orders. Across the Verath system, massive warships began powering their engines. The Kralith dreadnoughts were the largest, black mountains of metal, bristling with weapons that could crack planets. The Sindari cruisers were sleek and silver, designed for speed and precision strikes. The Verathari battleships were crystalline like their homeworld, beautiful and deadly at the same time. They broadcast their approach on all frequencies. They wanted humanity to hear them coming. They wanted the humans to spend 3 days in growing terror, watching their doom approach across the stars. It was the final cruelty of a species they considered beneath contempt. Catherine listened to the broadcasts through her personal communicator. She heard the boasting and the threats. She heard Admiral Vexnar describe in detail how he would personally lead the assault on Earth's orbital stations. She heard Sereth discuss how human children would make excellent servants once the conquest was complete. Then, a different message arrived. It came through channels that the Council races did not even know existed. It appeared as simple text on her communicator screen, visible only to her. The message said, "Stand firm. The old gods are waking." Catherine read those words 3 times. Then she deleted the message and returned her attention to the chamber. Chancellor Zyroth was still speaking, still making threats, still basking in the imagined glory of a victory he believed was already won. She smiled. Not a small hint of a smile this time, but a real one. The kind of smile that made the Sindari delegate pause mid-sentence. The kind of smile that made even Zyroth falter for just a moment. The aliens did not understand. They could not understand. They saw a lone human woman standing before the assembled might of 12 civilizations. They saw a representative of a species that had just lost its entire military fleet. They saw prey that did not know enough to be afraid. They did not see what Catherine saw. They did not know what was waiting in the darkness between stars. They had mocked Earth at the Council and pronounced sentence upon humanity without ever considering that perhaps they were the ones who should be afraid. The old gods were waking, and they were very, very hungry. Catherine Wells stood alone in the crystal chamber and watched the alien fleets depart for her homeworld. She did not pray. She did not weep. She simply waited with the patience of a woman who knew exactly what was coming next. The allied alien fleet moved through space like a swarm of angry insects. 17,000 warships stretched across millions of kilometers, their engines burning bright against the eternal darkness. They had been traveling for 2 days now, and the Sol system was growing larger in their sensors with every passing hour. Admiral Vexnar stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Kralith Dreadnought Worldbreaker. He watched the tactical display with satisfaction as his fleet maintained perfect formation. The humans had not attempted any resistance, no desperate attacks, no last-minute negotiations. Nothing but silence from the species that had dared to challenge the Council's authority. His sensor officer reported an anomaly. There were massive gravitational disturbances near the edge of the Sol system. The readings were unusual, unlike anything in their databases. The disturbances seemed to pulse in regular patterns, almost like heartbeats. Vexnar dismissed the report. He said it was probably just natural phenomena, perhaps some unstable asteroid field or a dying comet. He ordered the fleet to maintain course and speed. Earth was only 18 hours away now. He would not be distracted by scientific curiosities. In the shadow of Europa, hidden beneath 3 kilometers of ancient ice, Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the carrier vessel Avalon. She was 38 years old, with short dark hair and eyes the color of steel. She had commanded ships for 15 years, but this was the first time she had commanded one that officially did not exist. Around her, 300 human warships waited in absolute silence. Their engines were cold. Their systems ran on minimal power. Their hulls were coated in materials that absorbed sensor waves like a sponge absorbing water. To any outside observer, they were invisible, just empty space where nothing lived. But these were not the ships the Council knew about. General Andrew Stone's voice came through the quantum-encrypted channel. He was addressing the entire hidden fleet simultaneously, his words reaching every ship scattered through the Sol system and beyond. He spoke with the calm authority of a man who had spent 40 years preparing for this moment. He told them the truth. He told them what their grandparents had begun and their parents had continued. He told them about the day humanity first made contact with galactic civilization and realized that the universe was hostile beyond imagination. 200 years ago, he said, human scientists had intercepted communications between Council races. They had decoded those messages and learned what awaited them among the stars. They learned that dozens of species had emerged into the galaxy before humanity. They learned that every single one of those species had been conquered, enslaved, or exterminated by the older civilizations. They learned that the Council saw expansion as a zero-sum game where only the strong survived. So humanity made a choice. They built a visible fleet of 500 ships. They equipped those ships with weapons that seemed primitive. They crewed them with officers who acted nervous and uncertain. They presented themselves to the galaxy as exactly what the Council expected: weak, foolish newcomers who did not understand how the game was played. It was all a lie. The real fleet was called Project Prometheus. It was built in secret shipyards beneath the ice moons of Jupiter and Saturn. It was constructed in asteroid mining facilities that the Council sensors could not penetrate. It was assembled by workers who lived their entire lives in classified facilities, never speaking to anyone outside their clearance level. Dr. Helen Carter spoke next on the channel. She explained the technology that Project Prometheus had developed while the galaxy believed humanity was struggling to build basic starships. The Council races used nuclear engines that pushed their ships through space at respectable speeds. Human ships used quantum drives that folded space itself, allowing instantaneous travel across any distance. The Council races used plasma cannons and kinetic launchers that required massive power plants. Human ships used directed energy weapons that drew power from miniaturized fusion cores no larger than a human fist. The Council races needed crews of hundreds to operate their warships. Human automation reduced that number to dozens, with artificial intelligences handling most combat functions. And then there was the Wraith drive. Dr. Carter had led the team that developed it. She had spent 30 years perfecting a technology that should have been impossible. The Wraith drive allowed a ship to shift partially out of normal space, becoming intangible and invisible at the same time. A ship using the Wraith drive could pass through solid matter, like a ghost passing through a wall. It could appear anywhere, strike without warning, and vanish before the enemy could react. Captain Morgan listened to the briefing with fierce pride burning in her chest. She had known most of this already. Every officer in the hidden fleet had been told the truth when they accepted their commission. But hearing it spoken aloud on the eve of battle made it real in a way it had never been before. Commander Nathan Price delivered the final portion of the briefing. He displayed tactical data showing the position of every ship in Project Prometheus. The numbers were staggering. While the Council tracked 500 human warships, the actual number exceeded 12,000. While aliens believed human vessels were scattered and disorganized, they were actually positioned in precise formations around every Council homeworld. While the enemy fleet approached Earth expecting easy victory, they were sailing directly into the largest trap in military history. General Stone spoke again. He said that humanity had waited 200 years for this moment. They had endured mockery and contempt. They had swallowed their pride and played the role of fools. They had watched other species threaten their children and their worlds, while they smiled and pretended to be weak. No more. Tonight, he said, the ghosts would rise. Tonight, humanity would show the galaxy what happened when you pushed a species too far. Tonight, the old gods would wake from their long sleep and teach the Council the true meaning of fear. Captain Morgan gripped the arms of her command chair. Around her, the bridge crew waited with anticipation that was almost painful. On 300 ships throughout the Europa ice field, 12,000 men and women prepared for battle. The Avalon's engines began to warm. The Wraith drive hummed with power that made the air taste like lightning. Weapons systems that had never been fired in anger came online with soft electronic whispers. Lisa Morgan looked at the main view screen where the distant stars shone cold and ancient. Somewhere out there, 17,000 alien warships were coming to destroy her homeworld. They thought they were predators closing in on helpless prey. They were wrong. The Allied alien fleet crossed the boundary of the Sol system with weapons armed and shields at full power. Admiral Vex Nar stood at the center of his command deck, watching Earth grow larger on the view screen. The small blue world looked fragile and defenseless. He could almost taste victory. His communications officer reported that they were broadcasting demands for surrender on all frequencies. There had been no response. The human communication networks were silent. The orbital stations around Earth showed minimal power signatures. It appeared that the entire planet was simply waiting to die. Vex Nar allowed himself a rumbling laugh. He had expected at least some resistance. Perhaps a few brave fools mounting a hopeless last stand. The complete absence of opposition was almost insulting. He ordered the fleet to advance in attack formation. They would begin bombardment of the surface within the hour. Then the sky tore open. There was no other way to describe it. Space itself seemed to split apart in 1,000 places at once. And through those tears came ships. Human ships, warships of designs that no Council database had ever recorded. They materialized directly within the Allied formation, appearing between Kralith dreadnoughts and Sindari cruisers, as if they had always been there. Captain Lisa Morgan led the first wave. The Avalon emerged from fold space, surrounded by 2,000 vessels of the attack fleet. Her weapons officer did not wait for orders. They had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in simulation. Everyone knew exactly what to do. Quantum torpedoes launched in spreading patterns that painted the darkness with trails of blue fire. These were not the primitive missiles the Council expected from human technology. These were weapons that existed partially outside normal space, capable of bypassing shields entirely. They materialized inside enemy hulls and detonated with the fury of collapsing stars. 300 Kralith vessels vanished in the first 30 seconds. They did not explode in the traditional sense. They simply ceased to exist, replaced by expanding clouds of superheated particles that had once been metal and flesh and dreams of conquest. Admiral Vex Nar roared orders that his officers could barely hear over the chaos. He demanded to know where these ships had come from. He demanded to know why his sensors had not detected their approach. He demanded explanations that nobody could provide. The human fleet did not fight like anything the Council races had ever encountered. They appeared and disappeared at will, striking from impossible angles. A Sindari cruiser would target a human vessel only to watch it vanish the instant before the killing blow landed. Then that same human vessel would reappear behind the cruiser and tear it apart with weapons that punched through shields like paper. Commander Nathan Price led a strike team of 50 ships against the Verathari command ship. The massive crystalline battleship was one of the largest vessels in the Allied fleet, crewed by 3,000 of their finest warriors. Price and his team destroyed it in less than 4 minutes. They did not engage in a conventional battle. They simply folded space around the battleship and deposited quantum charges directly inside its engineering section. The resulting explosion was visible from Earth's surface, a brief new star that flared and died in the time it took to draw a breath. General Andrew Stone coordinated the assault from the Lunar Command Center. He watched his tactical display with grim satisfaction as decades of preparation unfolded in devastating action. The enemy fleet was fragmenting, their formation collapsing into chaos, as ships tried to flee in every direction at once. There was nowhere to run. Human vessels surrounded the Allied fleet in every dimension, cutting off escape routes as fast as they opened. The trap was perfect. The prey had no way out. Dr. Helen Carter monitored the battle from her station beneath the Rocky Mountains. She tracked enemy casualties with the clinical precision of a scientist observing an experiment. 17,000 ships had entered Sol System. In the first hour of battle, that number dropped to 12,000. Then 8,000. Then 5,000. Admiral Vex Nar finally understood that he was going to die. His flagship was surrounded by human cruisers that drifted through space like sharks circling a wounded fish. His weapons could not hit them. His shields could not stop them. His engines could not outrun them. He broadcast a desperate plea for reinforcement on every available frequency. He begged the Council homeworlds to send aid. He screamed that humanity had tricked them all, that the humans possessed technology beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, that everything they believed about Earth was a lie. His message went unanswered. The Council homeworlds had their own problems. Across 12 star systems, human ghost fleets had appeared simultaneously. They surrounded every Council capital world in perfect formation. Thousands of warships materializing from empty space as if summoned by dark magic. No shots were fired at these worlds. None were needed. The message was clear enough without weapons. If the Allied fleet at Sol was destroyed, every Council civilization would face the same fate. If humanity's demands were refused, those silent ships would begin their killing work. The galaxy had mocked Earth and pronounced judgment upon humanity. Now, humanity was returning the favor. Captain Morgan brought the Avalon alongside the crippled Worldbreaker. Admiral Vexnar's flagship was bleeding atmosphere from a dozen wounds. Its weapons were silent. Its engines were dead. The great dreadnought that had boasted of crushing humanity like insects was now helpless debris drifting through the void. Morgan opened a communication channel to the enemy vessel. She told Vexnar that he could surrender now or he could die. She gave him 30 seconds to decide. The great Kralith admiral, who had laughed at humanity in the council chamber and promised to enslave their children, transmitted his unconditional surrender in less than 10. Within 6 hours, the battle was over. Of the 17,000 ships that had come to destroy Earth, fewer than 2,000 remained operational. Most of those had surrendered. The rest were running for deep space, abandoning their allies in desperate flight. General Stone broadcast a message to the survivors. He told them to return to their homeworlds and deliver a report to their governments. He told them to describe exactly what they had witnessed in Sol System. He told them to explain that this was what happened when you threatened humanity. Then he told them to pray that their leaders were wise enough to learn from this lesson. Because if they were not, the ghosts would come for them next. The scattered remnants of the Allied fleet fled into the darkness. Behind them, Earth hung peaceful and blue and utterly untouched. The world that 12 civilizations had come to destroy had not suffered a single casualty. Humanity had won. The Crystal Hall of the Galactic Council looked different now. The platforms that had once held proud delegates were empty and silent. The rainbow light still filtered through the transparent walls, but it fell upon a chamber that had been transformed from a throne room into a courtroom. Catherine Wells stood in the same spot where she had faced mockery 3 days earlier. But she was no longer alone. Admiral Marcus Cole stood at her side, dressed in the battle armor of Earth Command rather than the formal uniform of a diplomat. Behind them, a squad of human Marines waited with weapons held at ready. Chancellor Zyroth knelt on the floor before the ambassador he had threatened with extinction. His robes were torn. His 4 eyes were dim with exhaustion and fear. Around him, the representatives of 11 other civilizations knelt in the same posture of surrender. Only the Omorathi were missing, their shadow forms having fled into the void when the Ghost Fleet appeared above their homeworld. Outside the crystal windows, human warships hung in orbit around Vareth Prime. Their weapons were trained on the planet's surface. Their message was silent but impossible to misunderstand. Catherine looked down at the beings who had laughed at humanity. She remembered every insult. She remembered every threat. She remembered the casual way they had discussed enslaving human children and burning human worlds. Part of her wanted to give the order that would turn their civilization to ash. But that was not why humanity had fought. That was not why they had hidden their strength for 200 years. Revenge was not the same as justice. She produced a document from her jacket. It was printed on actual paper. An old-fashioned touch that the aliens probably did not understand. She called it the Terms of Coexistence. The terms were simple. Every council race would withdraw their military forces from human space immediately. All human colonies in the Outer Rim would be recognized as sovereign territory. Trade relationships would be established on equal terms, with no tariffs or restrictions designed to limit human economic growth. Any species that violated these terms would face the full response of Earth's fleet. There was more. The council races would release all records of previous civilizations they had conquered or destroyed. They would provide reparations to any surviving members of those species. They would open their archives to human historians who would document the crimes of the past. And finally, the council itself would be dissolved. In its place, a new assembly would be formed. An assembly where every species had an equal voice, regardless of how long they had traveled among the stars. An assembly where the strong could not simply devour the weak. Chancellor Zyroth looked up at Catherine with something that might have been disbelief. He asked if humanity truly expected him to accept such terms. He asked if they understood what they were demanding. Catherine told him that he could accept the terms, or he could watch his world burn. She told him the choice was his to make. Admiral Vexnar, who had been brought from the ruins of his fleet to face judgment, interrupted with a snarl. He called humanity tyrants. He said they were no better than the council races they claimed to oppose. He said Earth had simply replaced one form of oppression with another. Captain Lisa Morgan answered him. She had entered the chamber moments earlier, still wearing the flight suit she had worn during the battle. She told Vexnar that there was a difference. She told him that humanity did not want to rule the galaxy. They did not want slaves or tribute. They did not want to be feared. They wanted to be left alone. They wanted to build their civilization in peace. They wanted to explore the stars without constantly looking over their shoulder for the knife that would end them. That was all they had ever wanted. But when the galaxy refused to grant them that simple courtesy, they prepared for the alternative. General Andrew Stone's voice broadcast through the chamber from the ships above. He addressed every world in what had been council space. He said that Earth did not seek empire. Humanity would not enslave or subjugate. They were not monsters, despite what their enemies might claim. But from this day forward, no species would mock humanity. No species would threaten their worlds or question their right to exist. Those who tested this resolve would discover what happened when ghosts became very real. One by one, the delegates signed the Terms of Coexistence. Chancellor Zyroth was the last, his hand trembling as he pressed his mark to the document. When it was done, he looked at Catherine with eyes that had lost all their former arrogance. He asked her how humanity had hidden their true power for so long. He asked how they had deceived the entire galaxy for 2 centuries. He asked what kind of species could maintain such patience. Catherine smiled. She told him that humans were very good at playing the long game. She told him that when you grew up on a world where everything wanted to eat you, you learned to be careful. You learned to hide your strength until the moment was right, and then you struck without mercy. The years that followed were not easy. Trust had to be built between species that had been enemies for longer than humanity had existed. Old hatreds did not vanish overnight. There were incidents and provocations and moments when it seemed the fragile peace might shatter, but it held. Slowly, carefully, the galaxy began to change. Dr. Helen Carter retired to a quiet research station on Mars. She spent her remaining years studying the stars she had helped protect, writing papers about phenomena that would take centuries to understand. She died peacefully at the age of 91, surrounded by students who had never known a time when humanity was weak. Commander Nathan Price took over the training programs at Sol Command. He prepared the next generation of officers for a galaxy that might one day need them to fight again. He hoped they never would. But he made sure they were ready. Admiral Lisa Morgan led humanity's public fleet on missions of exploration rather than war. She was the first human to set foot on a world in the Andromeda Galaxy, 2 million light-years from Earth. She planted a flag there and looked up at unfamiliar stars and felt pride in what her species had become. And somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, the Ghost Fleet waited. Silent and patient and eternal. Ready to wake again if the universe ever forgot the lesson learned when they mocked Earth at the Council. Some nights, when the stars were bright and the wind was still, people on Earth would look up at the sky and wonder if those ghosts were watching them. They would wonder if humanity's guardians ever slept, or if they drifted forever through the void, keeping vigil over the small blue world that had defied a hostile galaxy and survived. The truth was something only the ghosts themselves knew. And they were not telling. But on quiet nights, when children asked their parents about the lights in the sky, the answer was always the same. Those were the Watchers, the Protectors, the old gods who had woken when humanity needed them most. They were the promise that Earth would never stand alone. They were the reason that no one would ever mock humanity again.